Hello everyone, my name is Phương Oanh. I'm from Group 5. Our group presentation today focuses on a critical policy choice made in the Vietnamese economy, the trade-off between growth and inflation in Vietnam from 2022 to 2025. Next. Following the pandemic, the global economic context were dividing by rising price and increases monetary tightening by major central banks. Vietnam needing rapid recovery faced a delicate balancing act. This brings us to our central question: should the State Bank of Vietnam (SBV) prevent economic growth at all costs, even if it means accepting a higher risk of inflation? Next. The year 2023 was the turning point as our economy slowed. The SPV made a counter-current decision, cutting policy rate for consecutive time while the world raised their. This strategy explicit priorities destimulation, output, import, embodying the classic short-run trade-off illustrated by the Philippine curve. We analyze the success of this high-stake policy choice. Next. Our analysis is grounded in two key macroeconomic models, the Philippine curve and the ADAS model. Crucially, we use the ADAS model to examine how the SPV monetary policy shifted, accredited demand, and how bamboo diplomacy helped shift the long-run aggregate supply, ensuring more sustainable growth. Our conclusions are validated using real-world data on GDPs, CPI, and FDI from 2022 to 2025, with comparative insight from Asia -4 economies.
Today, as countries gradually recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, central banks everywhere face the same difficult question. Should they prioritize the economic growth or focus on stabilizing prices? And for Vietnam, this dilemma has become even more urgent. And that's why understanding monetary policy through strong theoretical frameworks is essential. And these are two models that help us to explain this trade-off. And these are the ADAS model and the Philip curves. So first, the ADAS model shows how total spending and total production interact to determine output and the price level. So when the State Bank of Vietnam uses the expansionary monetary policy, for example, lowering the interest rates, can borrow becomes more cheaper, and this increases the consumption and investment, shifting the aggregate demand to the right. And if the economy is operating below the potential, this is beneficial, which means the output rise, jobs increase, and inflation may stay manageable. But if the economy is already near full capacity, so then the higher demand mainly pushes up prices rather than increasing the output. So in other words, expansionary policy risks create the inflation without regenerating the real long-term growth. So next is the Phillips curves. So this curve helps to explain the relationship between the inflation and unemployment. So in the short run, the relationships is inverse, which mean like when the unemployment falls, the inflation tends to rise. So this gives the policymakers a short-term trade-off, which mean like more jobs may come at the cost of higher prices. So, but however, in the long run, this trade-off disappears. So it's mean like when people start expecting the inflation to increase, workers demand higher wages and firms rate like prices in advance. So as a result, inflation becomes persistent while unemployment returns to its natural level. So in conclusion, the ADS model and the Philip curves provide a solid foundation for evaluating Vietnam's monetary policy, and they show that while in the short run allowed some trade-off between the growth and the inflation, so there's no long-run trade-off. So therefore, Vietnam needs a balanced and flexible expectations-driven monetary policy to maintain the stability and support the sustainable growth.
The period from 2022 to 2025 was a test of flexibility and resilience for Vietnam's economy, navigating rapid global and domestic shifts. In 2022, the country achieved a remarkable 8.02% GDP growth, the highest in a decade. However, the landscape dramatically changed in 2023. Global pressures mounted as oil and gas prices soared, and the post-pandemic recovery across Asia remains uneven. While some large economies like India sustained growth, others, particularly China, experienced only a partial rebound, weighed down by property sector distress and weakened external demand. Advanced Asian economies faced mixed consumption returns alongside higher inflation and weakened exports. Next, domestically, a major shock was the Saigon Joint Stock Commercial Bank, or SCB incident, the center of Vietnam's largest financial fraud. This triggered a depositor run in late 2022 and necessitated large-scale state intervention. The State Bank of Vietnam, or SBV, initially had to increase interest rates to stabilize the banking system. Next, the year 2023 became the deciding moment for Vietnam to choose its economic priority, growth over strictly controlling inflation. Internationally, the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank were continuously raising interest rates to combat inflation fueled by geopolitical conflicts, accepting the risk of recession. For Vietnam, however, lower exports led to stagnated growth, with GDP reaching only 5.05%, falling short of the 6.5% goal. Yet, this figure was still considered high compared to regional peers in the prior COVID years. Next, facing the risk of a domestic recession, the SPV made a bold move. They decided to prioritize growth by aggressively lowering the interest rates for the fourth time in a row, bringing it down from 6% to 4.5%. This was a direct signal to ease credit conditions, making borrowing cheaper for businesses and households to spur production, investment, and consumption during a fragile recovery. This action signaled the SBV's conscious acceptance of inflation risk to promote economic expansion. Next, this growth-centric strategy, which accepted inflation, yielded positive conditions heading into 2024. The lowered policy rate set a new, lower floor for market interest rates and created room for commercial banks to cut lending rates. This established a monetary and credit environment more favorable for borrowing and business activity than in previous years. The strategy did come at a cost. The inflation rate has now climbed into the range of 3.5% to 4.5%. While traditionally, Vietnam has striven to keep inflation below 3%, these current figures remain within the acceptable range set by the National Assembly. In essence, Vietnam has accepted a higher managed inflation rate around 4% in exchange for prioritizing significantly heightened GDP growth, aiming for rates up to 7 to 8% for this breakthrough period between 2024 and 2025. Next,
Based on the IMF 2024 and 2025 data, we see a clear pattern. Vietnam prioritized maintaining strong growth momentum through the supportive monetary stance, accepting a higher inflation target in the range of 3.5 to 4%. In contrast, Thailand and Indonesia adopt a more conservative, low inflation strategy with inflation below 2.5% but significantly lower growth. This highlights Vietnam's different strategic choice within Asia, focusing on economic recovery and production expansion rather than the strict price stability. The key point is Vietnam's strong capital absorption capacity. Low interest rates have effectively stimulated investment and production, helping Vietnam achieve GDP growth around 6.1%, outperforming more cautious economies such as Thailand. According to the Banking Times 2025, Vietnam still possesses sufficient macroeconomic policy space to support growth without triggering excessive inflation. This demonstrates Vietnam monetary easy to is tight and disciplined, not an uncontrolled injection of liquidity. Despite accommodative policies, Vietnam has kept inflation well under control. CPI rose only 3.35% and core inflation remained even low at 3.20%. This indicates effective price management and at the absence of spec- speculative purpose. Importantly, Vietnam avoids the pitfall seen in cases like Venezuela, where governments printed money excessively to finance fiscal deficits, causing hyperinflation and economic collapse. In Vietnam, credit is directed towards production and real economic activity, ensuring that monetary easy push growth without jeopardizing macroeconomic stability.
So, based on the aforementioned analysis on the Phillips curve model and real-world data, our group concluded that the State Bank of Vietnam's decisions to prioritize growth during the 2022-2025 period was strategically sound. In the post-COVID-19 context, an excessive fear of inflation leading to tight monetary policy could have pushed the economy into recession. This would have prevented business recovery, triggered bankruptcies, and increased unemployment, which outcomes are far more detrimental than a controlled inflation rate of 4%. As a developing country, Vietnam requires high growth rates to avoid a middle income trap. Crucially, an inflation rate of 4 to 4.5% remains an acceptable trade-off to secure business recovery and post-pandemic job creation. To maintain this such success, we propose the following recommendations. The first one is timely braking. The SBV must continuously monitor market conditions and inflation indicators. If inflation exceeds 4.5%, a slight interest rate hike should be implemented to maintain control and prevent price instability. The second one is called targeted capital flow. The bank credit must be channeled into production and export to generate real value rather than fueling real estate speculation and creating economic bubbles. Finally, the government should continue to push infrastructure investment such as highways, airports, and high-speed metro lines to lower logistic costs for business, thereby reducing supply-side inflationary pressure, the AS curve. So that is our presentation. Thanks for listening.